Good job.
Hello, everybody.
Good evening.
Greetings, Ken.
Good evening. And welcome to Line Upon Line. This is episode 215. And tonight's topic is the Feast of Tabernacles. So we're going to talk about a holy day too rich and spiritual and physical food to abort. Feast of Tabernacles. So if you would like to start us out, Dr. Ricks, that would be great.
Okay. Father, they've always said for years, people who would go to God's feast would grow more than those who didn't go. It's just one of the things that from the years of church history we're thinking about. This little story is called the hunting prayer. At a Wednesday night church service, hunting season, our pastor asked the people, who's bagged the deer? No one raised a hand, not one single hand. Puzzled, the pastor said, I don't get it. Last Sunday, right before the hunting season started, many of you said you were missing church because of the hunting season. I had the whole congregation, those that were here, to pray for your deer. One hunter groaned, well, it worked. The deers are all safe. How did the bishop make holy water? He took some tap water, put it in the pot, and he boiled the hell out of it. That word's in the dictionary. Never mind. Yeah, that's true. Okay. This is Mr. Doofus's password. During a recent password audit, the people running the computer system found that Mr. Doofus had the following password in his computer: Mickey, Minnie, Pluto, Huey, Louie, Dewey, Donald, Goofy, Sacramento. When they asked him, they said, why such a long password? He said, well, I was told I needed 8 characters and a capital. Sacramento. Oh, here's just some Bible bumper stickers. Jonah had a bumper sticker, save the whales. Elijah had one, my other chariot rolls. Goliath, support the ban on slingshots. And Lot, if you see Sodom, you're too close. Now here's one that's very short but interesting. This good old boy got a call on his cell phone, and his wife said, look, if you're going to go fishing again, I'm going to leave you. And he said, well, I'm really, really going to miss you. Whoa, I got another bite. Everybody didn't smile at that one. Student driver. As an instructor in driver education at the Union Area High School in Michigan, I learned that even the brightest students can become flustered when they get behind the wheel driving. One day I had 3 beginners in the car, each scheduled to drive for 30 minutes. When the first student had completed his driving time, he asked to change places with one of the others. Gripping the wheel tightly and staring straight ahead, he asked in a shaky voice, should I stop the car? Well, anyway, there's different jokes. I know you're all going to love that fishing joke, right?
By the way, I think Mr. Doofus could have used James Ricks for one of those characters.
Yes, I think so.
I don't know.
Yes. Yes. 8 characters and a capital.
Huey, Dewey, Louie, and James.
By the way, for whatever it's worth, El Duce had to be spelled with all caps in Italy when Mussolini was the man. I thought that's kind of cute. Oh, well. People don't know the real fascist. If only they knew the real fascist.
Yeah, he was the original fascist.
By the way, here's something that, I don't know if you want to pray about it, but it's an interesting side effect. They have been more or less rioting, including near one of the nice college campuses where Natalie's uncle lives, Warsh University. Some really nice areas with nice shops. And these, I don't know if we call them anarchists, student activists, Black Lives Matter, or whatever you want to, they have different names, Antifas. They've been busting store windows of small businesses. And at least last weekend, they had to cancel a whole bunch of events, including charity events, in the St. Louis Metroplex because they showed up in 3 different areas. Not big enough like, a couple years ago, they tore the city down. But the threat of them was enough that they canceled all kinds of stuff. And here's what the people in St. Louis are afraid of. Amazon is considering moving their headquarters to St. Louis.
Really? And if they lose that because of these communist agitators, that would be terrible.
Terrible loss of the state of Missouri. Since the state of Missouri anyway, I'm in the state of Missouri, like to see them get it. Also, a bunch of downtown businesses last Friday closed up early, sent their employees home because they were afraid they'd be caught downtown when the Antifa and the other, I guess they think of themselves as positive activists, showed up and caused trouble. And that's not good for business.
No, it's not. People go elsewhere and just not bother.
It's not good for America either. But at any rate, so that's what's going on. We were at one point at Natalie's uncle's house. We were probably only about a mile and a half from some of that mess going on. It didn't get to us, fortunately, but it's just not a good thing to have out there.
Coincidentally, Amazon's considering Detroit, too. It was on the 6 o'clock news tonight.
Wow. Wouldn't that be something? I mean, I'm not saying Detroit doesn't need it, too. Don't get me wrong. Wouldn't that be something if they chose Detroit over St. Louis because of Antifas and Black Lives Matter?
Yeah.
Who would have thunk it? Oh, well. We'll see, won't we? I guess in all fairness, Detroit needs it more than St. Louis, right?
Detroit needs it more than anybody.
Yeah, so I guess you got to admit that.
I heard they also had on the news that the mayor of Detroit has a meeting tomorrow with the mayor of Windsor across the river. And they're going to meet together and see if they can't jointly entice Amazon to come to this area.
Isn't the mayor of Detroit a Muslim?
No.
No?
No.
Oh, there you go.
He's an Irishman, Mike Duggan.
Maybe it's the mayor of London that's Muslim. Is that right?
Yep,
Oh, well, that doesn't matter.
The mayor
No,
of Dearborn is a Muslim. He's a Detroit suburb.
Oh,
There
yeah.
you go.
Oh, yeah.
And apparently London as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, you're right. It is.
Well, it's an interesting world we're in. Well, getting to our topic, as we look at the Feast of Tabernacles as very rich spiritually, and it's rich spiritually, and of course physical food being the fall harvest time. Most people don't know that Jesus Christ kept the feast days that are in the Bible, including the Feast of Tabernacles, and he went to the Feast of Tabernacles at the risk of his life. Some of us have gone to the Feast of Tabernacles, at least a little bit risk to our job and our careers. And usually that worked out pretty well. But Christ risked his life. Here's what I would postulate. If Christ risked his life to attend the Feast of Tabernacles, why in the world would he do away with it? Or if he knew he was going to do away with it within a few months of the time when this is done, why would he risk his life to keep it?
You know, that's a good question. It amazes me too. I have, I deal with a lot of people, and I said I was going to be closed last night, and the guy asked me why, and I told him, and he goes to church, and he says, "How come I've never heard of this?" I said, well, "I don't know. It's in the Bible," and it upset him a little bit. And Sandy goes, "No, never mind. It's on the calendar." I get it. You haven't read the whole Bible. Don't you look at a calendar?
Yeah.
So, and he took it, I could see it bothered him a little bit because my chiropractor was there and he knows about it. And he started teasing him too. And it frustrated him a little bit.
I suspect that there are more groups keeping the feast than used to. And I think that's an outgrowth of the work of the two Armstrongs. I'm not saying other people didn't know it. And, back in 1902, Allen wrote his book about the holy days. But I think the Armstrongs kind of made the whole issue of the feast famous. And a lot of people, I think, have picked up on it.
I'm finding things online. There's a group here in Florida that it's all police officers and firefighters, and they keep the holy day. I don't know how much they like us or not, but on their website they talk about keeping the holy days and the food laws and things. And there's a couple churches, one in Texas and one just down the road from me in Brandon, that pretty much do everything identical to us. So, I think it's Daniel that says in the end time knowledge will be greatly increased. Well, it apparently is being increased. That isn't just airplanes and science. I think the knowledge of God is being greatly increased. Of course, the knowledge of evil is as well.
I just think the Worldwide Church of God should take some of the credit for publicizing it at a time when it wasn't that well known. I mean, it's well known now. But
well, the Armstrongs and the Worldwide Church of God came about during the age of radio and early television, and that enabled them to reach out to so many more people. But they were also dynamic. Everybody knows that. Everybody talks about Garner Ted's voice, how he reached out to truck drivers and people all over the country with that voice, and he did, no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
And charisma is huge. People will listen to you if you have a personality. I took a class from a guy a while back, and he opened the book and he just said, in 1972, the NRA put together a program that we now call and he did 3 days of that.
Good for your sleep, right?
Yeah. So how'd you stay awake through that?
Well, I would ask stupid questions and frustrate him and make him give answers to wake everybody up. But I sat there going, boy, this is going to be. Actually, that was a 2-day course I did with him. Well, this is going to.
It seemed like 3, right?
It seemed like 3. He's a good guy, but I'm telling you, you're sitting there going, no fluctuation in his voice at all, just blah, 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 blah. But Garner Ted would keep your attention, and so would Herbert Armstrong. Keep your attention, and they were dynamic. They knew the subject, and they were excited about the subject, and that made it exciting to you too, because you could feel the belief they had, and So, like I said, earliest sounds in my life was laying on the floor at church listening to the ministry, and my parents listening to them on the radio.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at our first slide.
All right, John 7:1. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he did not desire to walk in Judea, because the Jews sought to kill him. And the Jewish feast of Tabernacles was near. Therefore his brothers said to him, "Move away from here and go into Judea, so that your disciples also may see the works that you do. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it, that its works are evil." That's verse 8. Verse 3. But skipping down to verse 8. You go up to the feast. I am not yet going up to this feast, For my name is not yet fulfilled. My time is not yet fulfilled. And saying he these things to them, he remained in Galilee. But when his brothers had gone up, then he also went up to the feast, not openly, but as in secret.
By the way, when you read, especially books like John, when it says the Jews, realize everybody in the book is Jewish. I mean, Christ is Jewish. It means the Jewish leadership, and they ran that Feast of Tabernacles, which, of course, is at Jerusalem. So in that contextual sense, it was their feast. I know that's confusing to people, but when it says Jews, it means the Jewish religious leadership. And they had caravans that left from certain towns, and they, go to the feast. And they had, if you want to call them their version of police, out looking for Christ, and they literally wanted to kill him. So he stayed away from Jerusalem. By not going with the people from his hometown, he was not in the caravan. So when they went searching for him, they didn't find him. How he went up secretly, we're not told. But he probably, I don't say went in disguise, but he probably went with other caravans or in some other way where it was hard, and of course God was with him, obviously, hard to find him. And he could get lost in the crowd. He could be at the feast and he wasn't with the people they expected him with, and they couldn't find him. But the point I want to make is he had people trying to kill him on the road to the feast or at the feast. If anyone had an excuse not to go to the feast, isn't that the best excuse you could get?
That's a pretty good one.
And he still went. Anyway, even though he was staying away from Jerusalem at the time because they were so determined to get him, because they're so jealous of him. And by the way, some will argue, well, he only went to the feast to get a crowd. The problem with that argument is if you read all the Gospels, Christ got crowds even when he didn't want crowds. He was very popular with the Jewish people. So when it says the Jews were out to get him, it means the religious leadership was out to get him. But he was like a rock star of his age, his day. The people loved Christ. Many times the crowds were so big, he had to go up in the mountains or cross the lake to get away from the people. So he didn't. One thing Christ, and that only made the religious leaders even more jealous, because looking from their point of view, if one of their Pharisees went somewhere, maybe he'd get 100 in the synagogue. Christ got thousands and thousands everywhere he went. Can you imagine how jealous that made them?
Yep, I'm sure it made him quite angry.
Yeah. So he went to the feast because it's the right thing to do, even though his life was at jeopardy. Just to prove, let's go to the next slide. It proves that they were jealous and envious of Christ.
Matthew 27:15. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release to the people a prisoner whomever they desired. And they then had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said, "Whom do you desire that I release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" Is this the right slide?
Yes, it is. It's the right one.
Okay. For he knew they had delivered him because of envy.
Envy is the key word I want to emphasize. They were envious of Christ, and that's why they wanted to kill him. And maybe because they were carnal and stupid and evil, but also jealousy and envy can be, the green monster. What do you think, Gary?
Jealousy and envy is a very, very deep root of evil. I really don't know how to describe it, but jealousy and envy is, I'm sure that it's been manipulated by Satan all throughout history. It's just two emotions that man can't control.
When you can't control jealousy and envy, it's an open port for a demon to create whatever confusion in your mind he wants. If you read all these crime statistics, the guy goes to work and shoots his ex-wife and 4 other employees because he thought she loved them better than him. That kind of thing. pride. She got custody of the kids and he didn't, and that, I can't lose that pride. And you find that in all these world leaders, that these dictators, that nations are in loss. It's because of pride, and so these are all emotions that we're told not to have in the Bible. God, we're not to be jealous, and envious and lustful and proud and all those things, and because they create an open port for Satan to use you.
Jealousy and envy was probably the original sinful emotion. That's why Satan rebelled, because he was jealous and envious of God's position as the highest.
Yeah, it does make sense. He wanted to be just as high as God. And I'm not saying that sins like booze and sex and stealing and lying aren't a big deal. But in some ways, pride, envy are maybe more pure spiritual evil. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, the others seem to be more physical.
Yeah.
I read an article the other day about the dangers of alcohol, and immediately I realized that I had to quit reading. So.
It's just wrong. It's just wrong.
Before we get in trouble, let's move on to the next slide. Stop reading. Oh, by the way, my wife saw this article. This will amaze you. Moderate drinkers, I think like 3 to 4 glasses a week. Moderate drinkers gain less weight and have less diabetes and other health problems than teetotalers. How about that for a shocker?
Wow.
Isn't that a shock?
A little bit.
I mean, that's a shocker. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right. John 7:13. However, no one spoke openly of him because of the fear of the Jews. Now, about the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and taught.
And when it says fear, they're all Jewish. When it says fear of the Jews, it means the leadership had let it be known that if you speak kindly about Christ and we hear you, or ask too many questions about why you want to kill him, we're going to get you. And the people were scared of leadership. They were mean. And by the way, we look at being kicked out of the synagogue. Oh, it's the big deal. I'll just go to another synagogue. The way it worked normally, it was like being kicked out of the church. Many people in the Jewish community wouldn't do business with you again if you got kicked out of the synagogue. And you had all kinds of other problems. So they had a credible threat over the people. That's why they're afraid. In case you wonder, why are they afraid of the leaders? That's why they're afraid. Let's go to the next slide. But Christ was popular. And you kind of see a little of it here.
Now, to start off, we have that same verse.
Yeah, so we can pick it up in 14 or 19, whatever you want to.
All right. Now about the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and taught. And then 19, did not Moses give you the law, and yet and not one of you keeps the law? Why do you seek to kill me? But lo, he speaks publicly, and they say nothing to him. Perhaps the rulers truly know that this is the Christ indeed.
Now, if we leave that up for a minute, I don't know how the details work, but I assume they had these porches and different audiences around them, like kind of stand-up amphitheaters around the feast yard. And all of a sudden, Christ just popped up on stage and started preaching. And he was such a charismatic speaker and famous for his miracles, he captivates the crowd immediately, and they listen to him. And even we know from a few verses later, even though they had temple police, they didn't arrest him because they were mesmerized as well. And the people are saying, wait a minute, we know they're out to kill this guy, but there he is out there telling them they're wrong and whatever else he's saying, and he's getting away with it. Is it possible he really is the Messiah? and they know it. Can you imagine? Now, when you read more of the book, that only made them more jealous.
Yeah, really. He really is, the Christ. And then, yeah, it is. But you would think at some point their own fear would take over, but their hatred and jealousy was so overwhelming that it overrode their better sense.
That's right.
There are scriptures where they privately at night, apparently at night, admitted some of the things he's doing, he couldn't be doing if it were not from God. And yet in the daytime, they couldn't support him. It's almost mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think we're seeing examples of that in our world today, here and there.
Yeah.
Well, at that time, Satan was also right there. And I don't know how much influence that he could wield upon those people, but I'm sure that he was trying every trick in his book.
Yep.
The other thing I thought about a while back was as they were killing Christ, Satan was enjoying that. He couldn't, even though he kind of, I think, knew that this was going to seal his fate, he still couldn't bring himself under control to say, stop it from happening. He's so confused and so angry. And I think that maybe the Sanhedrin had some of that same personality. They couldn't control themselves because they're losing everything. And if you don't have the true belief and hope and faith of a resurrection and living forever with Christ, and all you're thinking is physical living for now, then why wouldn't you do something like that?
You know what? It's like they don't see the long game, the end game. All they could see is they got a small battle at the beginning or at this point that they want to win that little battle so bad they'll give up the whole war just to satisfy that lust or greed or that envy that's in them and not see the long game, their salvation. They just want to get this bit done with because they have so much rage in their minds and in their hearts that that's all they can see. They can't see 1,000 years from now when they've lost their salvation. It's just that's how much the flesh can override the brain.
And killing Christ at the Passover, at some point they had to know that was stupid, but like you say, Ken, they couldn't control themselves. And just to make the point we want to make, Christ went into this dangerous cauldron at the Feast of Tabernacles. That shows us how important Christ thought the Feast of Tabernacles was. And I'm sure he gave a fabulous sermon and told those guys they were wrong in public, but they needed to hear that, and the people needed to hear it.
Yep.
The second party we want to bring up, and there's a parallel here. The Apostle Paul struggled to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. As you all know, Christianity wasn't even called Christianity at first. It was a sect within Judaism. And Paul wanted to keep the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem, the big one, with all the other Christians that were there. And he had to risk his life to go to Jerusalem too. I'm not saying that the religious leaders were jealous of Paul. I think in Paul's case, when you read, especially Acts 23, 24, you get a broader picture of them. We're going to bring here now. But Paul was one of them. He was one of their leaders. I mean, he was such a leader, they gave him documents to arrest people and put them in jail. I mean, he was a big wheel within the Jewish world. And that gave him credibility. He wasn't just not that I'm putting these guys down, but it wasn't just some fisherman farmer from the sticks. He was one of their main scholars, and he said himself, one of the top ones. And since that got canonized, I'm assuming Paul wasn't bragging.
His reputation preceded him.
Yeah. And so his coming to Jerusalem after he's done all that great work among the nations, that's what Gentile means, among the nations, he was a hot topic, one that they wanted to shut up badly.
Paul was a brilliant man, and he had all the education and maybe more than some of them, and possibly could have one day become high priest. He was a very respected man, and a very humble man when you read some of his writings about himself. He was a very good man. And I believe that when he was stoned, he was dead and resurrected to go to the next town. Because stoning, they don't stop till they can verify that you're dead. What kind of a person was he that he got this stoning, God resurrected him, he goes to the next town and does it all again? I mean, how much more Christian can you be? I think if that happened to me and I was resurrected, I'd say, "Hey, I did it once. You know, give me a break here." You know, it's not Paul. He went straight into the next town and did it again.
And Paul, by going to the feast in Jerusalem, was like going into enemy territory. But let's go to the next slide. Paul did the same thing that Christ did, and maybe for some of the same reasons.
Acts 18:19, and he came to Ephesus and left them there. But he himself entered into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. And they asking him to stay a longer time with them, he did not consent, but took leave of them, saying, I must by all means keep the feast that it is coming in Jerusalem. But I will return again to you, God willing. And he sailed from Ephesus.
So, he started his evangelistic campaign in the synagogue, and eventually, with one exception, Berea, they'd kick him out of the synagogue, but he would take a lot of new converts with him, and that's how the church grew. There he is, a chance to convert more people, but he knows with travel time he has to leave to get to Jerusalem on time. So he leaves a chance to convert more people to go to the feast. And now it doesn't say in the verses right around there that they're out to kill him, but in the next couple of chapters, he's told that he's a marked man. If he goes to Jerusalem, he's going to die or be arrested and chained and all that. I believe Paul knew it even then, that it was dangerous for him to go to the feast in Jerusalem, but he was determined to go anyway, to make certain spiritual points and to do certain teaching that he wanted to do. And my point is, if this is now the New Testament church, if the Feast of Tabernacles has been canceled, as some Protestants say, how come Paul is risking his life to keep the Feast of Tabernacles? And it's written in the Bible. It wouldn't make any sense, would it?
No, not at all. But they I don't know how they come up with a excuse, but they have a definite excuse why they don't do it. They prefer Christmas, I guess.
Let's go to the next slide. I think the next two slides will help us get a picture of the kind of things that Paul was facing.
Right. Acts 11:26. And finding him, it was a whole year, they were gathered to them in the church and taught a considerable crowd. And the disciples were first called Christians in Antioch.
Let's go to the next slide. I just want to emphasize they were a sect within Judaism. That's how they were viewed for a while, for a number of years.
And he spoke boldly in the name of the Lord Jesus and argued with them, the Grecians, but they seized on him in order to kill him. But knowing the brothers, brought him down to Cilicia and sent him forth to Tarsus. Then indeed the churches had rest throughout all Judea and Galilee and Samaria. And having been built up and having gone on in the fear of the Lord and in the comfort of the Holy Spirit, they were increased.
Now, let me explain that. That first verse, when it says Grecians, it means synagogues of the Jews who had the Greek backgrounds. And this is all talking about Jerusalem and that area around Jerusalem. When Paul was there preaching, there was an uproar as they feared Paul's preaching, a lot of persecution. When the brethren sent Paul home, Tarsus home, and out of the area, even though there were other apostles there, they had relative peace because Paul was more of a threat to the Jewish leaders, and his preaching apparently was more caustic, or at least it was more effective in undermining them than the other apostles. So they didn't have peace until they got rid of Paul. I'm making that point to give you some idea of why it was dangerous for Paul to go to Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. And yet he did it when he could have stayed and converted other people. And also there was a big lie, and the world still believes the big lie, that Paul preached that God's laws were done away. Now, Paul did make an exception for Gentiles regarding circumcision. They say if you make an exception in a law, that doesn't mean you do away with the law. You just simply make an exception. You say, well, you're a 40-year-old man. If I have circumcision required for you now, it'll simply be a barrier to keep people out of the truth, which is, anyway. And there are scriptures in the Old Testament that says circumcise your heart, not just your flesh. So Paul had biblical basis for his exception, but people were teaching that Paul was doing away with all the law. Isn't that the big lie we face today as well?
Exactly.
Yep.
Even if there is an exception, there had to be a remarkable reason for that exception. And Jesus Christ and Paul both knew that the feasts of God, including the Feast of Tabernacles, was God's law. And they had to comply with that law, unless there was a remarkable exception. And they both knew that they were examples too, and that they needed people to see them keeping that law to make their word credible. And we need to do that. We need to do that today.
Well, also, who is Paul to do away with anything God said? Paul cannot do away with the laws of God.
So true.
And I think if Paul were resurrected today and he saw these churches saying that he said that, he would be very upset.
Oh, yeah.
And we talked about this in the past. His fighting the Judaizing party, we may come back to that at a future date, some other scriptures. You can misinterpret what he said because you don't understand him in the context. But nothing God ever said or did was bad. Maybe some things don't apply now, or they apply differently, and you can make some exceptions, but that is not to say that anything God said. Take something minor. I know I've mentioned like tattooing. Now, I know that's a minor law, minor. But I would advise somebody to avoid doing it, because why dirty up your body is the temple of God. And in a town like this one where I live, guess where most of the drug dealers hang out?
The tattoo parlor.
Tattoo parlors.
It's just
I was reading
about it. It's bad for you.
Yeah, I was reading an article the other day that there's a lead in the ink in the tattoos, and it's affecting people's health. That's getting them. So.
And I'm not saying if you got tons of tattoo, this is the worst sin in the world. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying everything God said, even minor things, are good for us if we do them. Okay, let's look at our next slide as Paul faces his big challenge when he gets to Jerusalem to keep the feast.
Acts 21:19. And having greeted them, he related one by one what things God had done among the nations by his ministry. And hearing, they glorified the Lord and said to him, "You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are who believe, and they're all zealous of the law. What is it, therefore? At all events, a multitude will come together, for they will hear that you have come. Therefore, do this, what we say to you. We have 4 men who have a vow on themselves. Taking them, be purified with them, and be at expense for them, so that they may shave their heads, and all may know that what they have been told about you is nothing, but you yourself also walk orderly and keep the law."
Now notice, what they've been told about you is nothing. Now, if that was false, all the top apostles like John and Peter and James are all there. It wouldn't make any sense if the New Testament church had done away with God's law. It'd be like the they're trying to deceive people. So the only way that scripture can be true is if Paul kept God's law, and that would include the laws of the annual holy days like the Feast of Tabernacles. It's the only way that scripture makes any sense at all. Some will say, well, there's no temple now. That's true. And it does limit some of those ritual things that they did can't be done anymore. But that, that's kind of a minor thing, really. It's not really a big deal. Would you agree?
Well, actually, we become the temple of the Holy Spirit when we're baptized and His hands are laid upon us and the Holy Spirit enters into us. We present ourselves as a temple. Mm-hmm. So back to your statement about tattooing the temple, I said that to a guy one day, and I said, "Don't you believe your body's a temple of the Lord?" And he says, "Yes. Every time I move into a new house, I redecorate." So I don't know what to do with that.
What are you going to do with that,
And I know as we get older, there are limited things we can do health-wise. But I think a reasonable effort to take care of your body shows respect to the temple that the Holy Spirit is going to be in.
Yep, I agree.
I think probably the first step in that process is to observe the clean and unclean, and not ingest things into your system that are unclean. We were having a big discussion on that over in the flu vaccine and the ingredients in that. There's supposed to be swine byproducts in the flu vaccine.
Ooh. I know a person in our church that will not take any health food if she feels they have the wrong kind of whatever solvent. Is that what they call solvent that's either encapsulated or is the stuff that is in that carries the medicine? If it's got shellfish or pork swine, they won't take it. And I understand it. And I know that people will argue, well, that doesn't really matter, but I don't know.
We go way out of the way to make sure we don't. There's a health food store over in Brandon that when I go in there, if I'm looking for whatever, they know he won't eat unclean stuff like L-cysteine, which is an amino acid. I won't take that. And they make sure that they hunt it down for me to make sure they get me clean stuff.
So they get you a beef or vegetarian version of it?
Yes.
Good.
And L-cysteine, amino acid, L-cysteine, a lot of people don't know, but a lot of times that's human hair. And
I didn't know that.
I called some protein manufacturers and I asked them where it came from. They said duck feathers, chicken feathers, pork. And I said, and human hair. And the lady took a breath. She said, we buy what's on the market.
Are you familiar with the word biologics? What biologic is it's a substance that is derived from the body of some animal or insect or some life. And there are several of them that are used in these vaccines now, including the pork byproducts. And the article that I read, got a new doctor I'm working with, he said when it first came, the first flu vaccine came out, they were using byproducts from monkey blood. And it is still being found in babies born, and it's the third or fourth generation or whatever.
We'll also look up probiotics and see where that comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no.
And these are smart people that are telling us to take this stuff in. James, you got a guilty look on your face. Did you get a flu shot this year?
No. I've never heard about probiotics being coming from the wrong source. That's a totally new one on me.
Yeah, you might want
I hadn't heard that before.
Do some research on that because I was pretty taken back where that comes from.
Wow. Oh, well. Let's go to the next slide. That one kind of caught me by surprise.
All right, Leviticus 23:1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, and say to them, The feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim, holy convocations, even these are my appointed feasts.
Notice the term feast of the Lord. And obviously the God of the Old Testament is Jesus Christ. So they were his feast days, not the Jews. I know the Jews keep them and preserve the Old Testament. But I think it's a misunderstanding that the world conveniently uses to call them the Jews' feast. They're really God's feast days. The Jews keep them, but they're still God's feast days. And by the way, the Israel, which included more than just the Jews, lived in temporary booths, and then they entered into the promised land. So I think Tabernacles represents living in temporary booths, because we live a temporary life, but we're moving into the promised land. And when Israelites got to the promised land, they had this giant fall harvest, the big harvest, so they could really celebrate the feast in a positive way. The people actually were supposed to save part of their harvest so they could really have a great festival in the fall. Let's go to the next slide.
Deuteronomy 16:15. 7 days you shall keep a solemn feast to the Lord your God in the place which the Lord shall choose, because the Lord your God shall bless you in all your increase and in all the works of your hands. Therefore you shall surely rejoice.
You know, two things. One is you're commanded to rejoice, and God wants you to save up for the feast. I want to contrast that to Christmas. In Christmas, people go into great credit card debt. I believe God would prefer you to save up for the Feast of Tabernacles, because that's in the law. At least the principle is there. Granted, we're not farmers, and so maybe the details would vary, but the principle is you save up for the feast so you don't go into great debt to go, and then you can rejoice not knowing you're going to be in great red ink, and I think God will bless you for it.
I know I'm blessed at the feast, just to see the people and to get out of the world for 8 or 10 days, not have to deal much with life, and I'm with church people who aren't using foul language, or the subject matter is clean and enjoyable and uplifting, and for me it's huge.
It is a true escape from the world. I mean, when you're amongst all the brethren and all the people that are mostly one mind, it is an escape from the world, and it is a shock to go back to it sometimes afterwards.
There's a lot of love when you walk into our services. The people, you can feel it. It's a lot of love, a lot of camaraderie and brotherhood and family. And I've had people that have attended other feast sites tell me that ours were so different, that they felt so much more love and kinship and that kind of thing when they would attend with us, because there are people that go to different sites and things, and I've got very positive feedback about us.
We've got a lady, I believe she's from down around Austin, maybe, Texas. She was Frank Sherrick's old group. I can't remember. I think the host name was Alewife, maybe, something like that. Mm-hmm. But anyway, she's up here in Michigan to visit her daughter, and she didn't get to attend Sabbath service for about 3 weeks until she found us. She got hooked up with us, and she came in that first day and introduced herself. She had called me earlier and talked to me, and I introduced her around, and we all began talking about people we knew in the church and the holy days coming up and things that we always talk about just before service starts. And she had a big smile on her face, and she says, "Boy, does it feel good to be back with my own people." That's the feeling you get when you arrive at feast. everybody there is your own people.
Right. And I've noticed you go in a restaurant, it could be people that you don't know as well as others, and they're like, sit with us, you know? And, you know, it's wonderful. You get to know these people, you get to see them once a year, you know? And it's just, it's also, you know, this is the other thing is the men will walk up and hug another man and say, I love you, man. And, in the world, they get you rolling on the floor. But these men will put their arm around you, and they genuinely care about you, you know. And you know, for us, it's our family.
Wonderful. Would you put the next slide up for us, Ken, please?
Revelation 20, verse 4. I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and who had not worshipped the beast nor his image, nor had received his mark on their foreheads nor in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them. And they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. And God will wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there will be no more death, no mourning, nor crying out, nor will there be any more pain, for the first things passed away.
You know, it's kind of the end of the Revelation. Talk about the millennial reign of Christ, the paradise, and that's what the prosperous days of the Feast of Tabernacle represent, the great reign of Christ. And eventually, after God does some things to help people who've never had a chance, eventually all tears will be wiped away, no death, no pain, will be in paradise forever. I think the Feast of Tabernacles is kind of step one in that direction. Isn't that a wonderful thing?
Absolutely.
Let's move to the next slide. This is maybe the one I think that's even more shocking to people.
All right. Zechariah 14:16, and it shall be everyone who is left of all the nations which shall come up against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the feasts of tabernacles. And it shall be whoever will not come up from all the families of the earth to Jerusalem to worship the King Jehovah of hosts, even on them shall be no rain. And if the family of Egypt does not go up, and nor come in, they shall have no rain. But the plague with which the Lord shall strike the nations who do not come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be Egypt's offense, and the offense of all the nations who do not come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles.
Now, by the way, this battle he's talking about in Jerusalem, you know, that came up against Jerusalem, that's the Battle of Armageddon, talked about in Revelation, well, the last couple chapters, where God in chapter 19, you know, kind of like smashing grapes in a grapevine, just crushes them. After he's crushed the armies of the world, and God and Jesus Christ have taken over the world, well, the first things he's going to do is say, you, mean all the nations of the world, are going to have to keep something you've never heard of, the Feast of Tabernacles. And they're going to say, what? And if you don't send your representatives up, there may be more details, but it's irrelevant what the details would be, and acknowledge that that's your big religious celebration now, you're going to be zapped with one plague or another. Now, why would God do that if during the entire Christian era that we live in, the Feast of Tabernacle has been done away? Why force it on the world in the future if it's being done away?
Right. And then why would you have them keep it if it wasn't worth keeping all the time before that? You know?
Exactly. And God is not going to just, something I recommend, the suggestion, it's going to be, you do it or else.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm sure after so many years of drought and maybe other plagues, they're going to be forced to do it, whether they want to or not.
I remember when, before I had joined the church, it's probably in the late 60s when my mother was in the church and she was receiving the Plain Truth magazine. And I'll never forget one issue came, and on the front cover, there was a picture of the Pope, whoever it was at that time in the late 60s. And the caption read, "During the millennium of Jesus Christ, this man is going to attend the Feast of Tabernacles."
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And maybe even you could think about, I was told this was I saw it in a newspaper in Cape. I assume it's an accurate statement. There were about 7 or 8 or 9, 10 major religious leaders. There were some mullahs and Buddhists and I don't know, some other big religious leaders were all there together, including the Pope, and they were all saying, you can get to heaven any number of ways.
Yeah.
Universal, it's kind of like a universal religion or did anybody see that story that was in some of the newspapers? There was a picture.
No, I missed that.
It's like universal religion.
Yeah, I saw it.
Of course, the Bible says there's only one way, one door, and that's Jesus Christ. But
If you don't use the Bible,
yeah, that's true. You can do anything you want.
if your dogma is more important than the writings of God and the apostles, you know.
And the world's religions will want to do their own thing, but when Christ gets back, nope, it's going to be God's way or else.
Right.
Well, I remember Oprah interviewed Joel Osteen, and he said that his statement was, there are many different roads that lead to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, go ahead, Dave.
He talks about his Muslim people that attend his church, and
Yep.
but I'll give him this: it did come out and say stop eating pork. That he doesn't. It's biblical. It's a filthy animal, and so broken clock's wrong twice a day.
By the way, do you think
right twice a day?
Yeah, the Joel Osteen's church was one of the few that didn't take in refugees in Houston?
No, he took him in. No, he took in refugees. Well, no, at first he couldn't take them in because the church was underwater or threatened with flooding itself. So once that happened, then he let people come in. That was a mix-up at first, I think. That people were told, the people that don't like Christianity, even nominal Christianity, wanted to get him, so they tried to make up a story saying that he was
okay.
good. Yeah.
So he's not a bad guy after all.
No, I don't think so. At least not with that. I mean,
Yeah, not there.
not there. But I mean, he did open up the doors. Whether or not I think he couldn't at first.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I want to ask people, we need a miracle for Carolyn and Anthony Wilson, health-wise, dealing with cancer and related. Carolyn Birch and Anthony Wilson, they really need a miracle. So remember them in your prayers. Looking at world events, any thoughts occur to anybody?
Well, I thought it was interesting, the speech that Trump gave when he talked about Venezuela. They're struggling not because of the poor implementation of socialism, but that they implemented socialism faithfully, and that's why they're in all this trouble, which is a very true statement. Mm-hmm. But the biggest thing I thought of was the reaction of the room. If you get that audio again or video, you can hear the room when he said that started to murmur, and they were just like a kind of a little low roar with these people talking amongst themselves. There was a couple of people maybe clapped a little bit, but it was very small amount. And I think that murmur says it all, that how dare someone come into the UN and criticize their method of government that they're using to try and pull the world together as a one unit. And I don't think they cared too much for that, because they're mostly socialists, and that's what they want the world to adhere to. And here's this guy, the leader of the free world, and telling them that it's no good. It's a failed system. It was a perfect speech for that. It needed to be said in the UN for 50 years.
It is a failed system. Communism is the greatest economic collapse in the 20th century.
Right. And you know what? The biggest argument against or for socialism is they say, well, we never did it right. We didn't implement it correctly, or we didn't do enough socialism. And here was Trump saying, not only you did it right, you did it perfect, and then look what happened. People are starving and eating zoo animals.
Look at Venezuela. Yeah.
There were a lot of jaws dropping during his speech.
Oh, also he said national sovereignty is important, because you could argue that fascism and communism were not defeated by some global whatever. They were defeated by sovereign nations like America, Britain, and others who resisted. And that's why they collapsed.
You're seeing it's just a last gasp to try and save freedom. It's I never thought I'd hear it again in my lifetime, but it was quite refreshing to hear someone actually say that up there. That individual liberty is and capitalism is the solution to the world's ails, not the cause of them.
And by the way, statism, that's where you worship the state. Socialist governments, the individual is not so important. The big government is important. The people serve the government, not the government serve the people. And that's really an evil thing if you think about it. And that's what people like Mussolini, Hitler, and Stalin, the people were pawns to serve the big state government which they ran.
Well, if you remember I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Back in the 80s, the Olympic teams, when the Russian teams, it said CCCP on the back of their jackets. And this reporter says, what does that stand for? And he said, communist, communist, communist people.
Not exactly, but we'll take
it. Well, you could make this argument. I don't know if it'll work out this way, that a stronger America may actually keep some of the bad actors from misbehaving a little longer. Because we do know historically that when Britain and France were leaders of the free world, League of Nations, and when Hitler was making his early moves and the generals wanted to replace him, they kept appeasing him, giving him easy victories. And the more they appeased him, the more he thought he was invincible.
I'm looking at Iran right now as well. We just gave them $150 billion, actual cash dollars, and they're up to something. They think they came out today with a new missile or something, a new weapon of some kind, and paraded it around.
Yeah, North Korea and Iran could be working together, and oh well, it's probably, one man said the worst scenario could be because the missile deal we made with them allows them to get an A-bomb. They just have to go a little slower at doing it. But that means all their rivals in the Middle East, there will soon be an A-bomb weapons war or weapons race. And I can think of nothing healthier for the world than a number of Middle Eastern countries with atomic bombs. Can you?
Oh, yeah. That's just great.
That's the healthiest thing the world can use. Saudi Arabia is going to have one. Egypt will have to have one. Jordan, Turkey.
We don't a few others. The neutron bomb anymore. Never discussed the neutron bomb.
Is that the one with no radiation?
It's so low that all life dies, but none of the buildings and structures and stuff like that get damaged.
Oh, well. I know they've got one with little radiation, too. So the soil and the land are safe.
Yeah, I'm probably talking about the same thing.
We will see. And obviously, the world is going to be a dangerous place. But a strong America may slow down things. Because if I were North Korea, I certainly would not want to attack anybody after the threats they've had. I mean, now they're going to rattle a saber and show off of their military power, but I don't think they're going to attack anybody. There may be some border incidents, you know what I mean, but no big major attack, because, I mean, wouldn't you be afraid to do that if you were them?
If I had my senses, I mean, if I had a brain in my head, but we don't know that this guy does. I mean, he's acting crazy. Maybe he doesn't have any better sense.
But probably his logic goes this. You may not remember this, but Gaddafi gave up, when he saw what happened to Saddam Hussein, he gave up his atomic bomb research. And America promised to leave him alone. Well, unfortunately, we got new elections and new people, and they took him out. And same with Ukraine. They gave up their A-bombs. America was going to protect them, and we didn't, and the Russians took a good chunk of it. So I'm saying dictators like him probably think, as long as they got the A-bomb, I'm safe from invasion. Maybe that's true. And I say maybe that's true. But I would also say I'd be afraid to use it on anybody, because, especially in one of America's allies like South Korea or Guam or Japan, wouldn't you, I'd almost guarantee your destruction?
You would think so.
And we also have missile defense. That's why the Russians couldn't keep up. And, you know, maybe he'd shoot a bunch of missiles. They may all get shot down, then he'd get zapped. See the stupidity of that move. I mean, no one knows if the missile defenses will work, because you could argue, if I shoot 6 missiles at one target, the missile defense is not going to shoot them all down. Probably not. That's true. But you never know, right?
Right.
I look at Israel's Iron Dome, and it catches most of all those rockets sent at it. So I don't really know. But assuming that we put missile defense in South Korea, America has missile defense ships. They don't have it. That gives the advantage to America. I mean, even he would have to know that, wouldn't you think?
You would hope so.
He can still do a lot of damage to South Korea. It's so close. I'm not saying he couldn't do a lot of damage. I'm just saying he would be destroyed too. So I don't think if I were him, I'd be scared spitless to do anything offensively. He'd probably hold on to it to save himself from attack. But I don't think I would be afraid to mess with Trump if I were him. But that's just my opinion.
Plus, how many could he really have? I mean, how many of these does he have? We have no idea.
Not as many as we have, that's for sure.
Well, no. I mean, he could have 2 or 3 or 4. But who knows?
Yeah, maybe 10 or 15. Even still, with missile defense, and we have more stuff, it would be suicide. Well, so I don't think he's going to. There may be some there's always border incidents where somebody got shot on the border. You know, what I call minor things, but I don't think anything major. Boy, I could be wrong. But I don't think he's that crazy. I think the saber rattling is to get money, get aid, to get attention, to make himself look important.
Yeah, could be. Let's hope so.
Everybody's talking about him. He's important, but I don't think he's that crazy. By the way, next week, and we want to encourage everybody to go to the feast if you can. There are motels you can call around Branson. They're on the Branson website. You can get a motel room at the last minute. And you may be able to get a motel at the main lodge at the last minute too. Come to the feast. You won't regret it. If you can't come for the whole feast, come for maybe 4 days. Then next year, save up for the whole thing. And next Friday, I think it's the last one we're going to have before the feast. We're going to talk about the last great day.
That'll be atonement too.
Oh yeah, and atonement will be right after that. Though we have talked about atonement on the podcast already.
Right. Yeah.
We'll mention that.
We'll be in atonement when we're on. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. It'll be a short program.
I thought that they might say that.
You're very observant, Ken.
Yes, we'll have started the atonement. Not as
ends
short
up
as it
their
would be
system.
if it was near the end of atonement, but yes.
Yeah. Well, any other comments before we close out for the night?
I guess not. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. We do appreciate you coming in and stopping and spending this time on the Sabbath with us, or whenever you can download the podcast on your device or just watch it on YouTube. Again, we appreciate it, and we will hope to see you all again here next week. So good night, everybody, and hope everyone has a wonderful Sabbath.
Good night. Oh, before I think about it, Dave, we'd like to get with you all Saturday night of the feast.
That'd be
We're
great.
going to be coming in.
All right,
But
let me end this, and then we'll...
I'm sorry.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here. And hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.